My name is Arlene Franklin. I'm 31 years old. The night before my wedding, my sister emptied my bank account, $451,000, and disappeared with the man I had planned to marry. She did it from a bathroom at my own rehearsal dinner in a Napa Valley venue I had paid for, surrounded by people who were toasting my future. I found out through a bank alert on my phone. I read it twice. Then I put my phone face down on the table and smiled at my guests. My grandmother was watching me from across the room. She already knew. She had been waiting for years for someone in this family to finally make a move she could answer. I want to tell you everything, but to understand what happened that Friday night, you need to understand what I had built and what my family had always been willing to take from me. I bought my apartment at 28 Pacific Heights, San Francisco, not with family money, not with help. With 6 years of 6 a.m. wake-up calls, clients who changed their minds 14 times, and a freelance design portfolio, I built from nothing into a firm with my name on the door. When I signed the papers on that apartment, I bought myself a small keyring, gold simple, and hung my new keys on it the same afternoon. No celebration dinner, no champagne. Just me, standing in an empty room, knowing I had done it without asking anyone for anything. The $451,000 was everything I had. 6 years of savings, plus a modest inheritance from my grandfather on my father's side, money he had left specifically for me, not divided among the family, just for me. I had kept it in a Wells Fargo savings account. It was supposed to become the down payment on a house after the wedding. A home. Something permanent. I need you to understand the number, not because it's dramatic, because it was everything I had built, and someone took it in under 3 minutes. Dr. Brandon Harrington came into my life in September of 2022. We met at a healthcare architecture symposium in San Jose. He was presenting on surgical suite design. I was attending for a client project. We talked for 40 minutes at the coffee station after his panel. He was precise. He was funny in a dry way, and he listened when I spoke, which sounds like a low bar, but you'd be surprised. He was 34 at the time, neurosurgeon at UCSF Medical Center, the kind of man who made people in rooms straighten up slightly when he walked in. He wore an understated watch. He never overstated anything. I found that attractive. I would later understand it differently. We dated for a year and a half before he proposed. Big Sur, February 2024. The ring was a 2.1 carat solitaire. I posted a photo. 847 likes. I remember that number because it felt like the world confirming something I already believed. That this was right. That this was mine. That the life I had worked for was finally arriving. My grandmother Sheila called the next morning. She was the first person to ask me not how the ring looked, but how I felt. I said happy. She was quiet for a second. Then she said, "Good, stay paying attention." At the time, I thought that was just Sheila being Sheila. She had a way of giving you something useful wrapped in something cryptic. Sheila Franklin is 74 years old. She started with one rental property in Sacramento in 1978. Today, her commercial real estate portfolio is worth approximately $12 million, and she controls the family trust fund that my grandfather established before he died. For a decade, my father, her son, maneuvered her out of business decisions. Subtle at first, then less so. He took meetings without her. He restructured agreements without her signature. He explained it as protecting her from the stress. She never made a scene. She watched. She restructured her holdings quietly, outside of his reach, over several years. By the time he realized what she'd done, there was nothing left to contest. I grew up watching her sit at the corner of every family dinner, back against the wall, eyes on the room. I thought it was a quirk. It was a strategy. Sheila called me 3 days before the rehearsal dinner. Out of nowhere, one question. "Is Tiffany going to be in Napa?" I said yes, of course. She was a bridesmaid. Sheila said, "Okay," and changed the subject. I filed it under nothing. I was wrong. Tiffany is my younger sister, 28 years old, 3 years behind me in every measurable way, and she had spent our entire lives making sure I knew she felt that. That's not entirely fair. Let me try to be exact. Tiffany was the daughter my parents leaned toward. Not in a visible way. Favorites are shown, not announced. She was introduced to my father's law firm partners. She was offered connections, referrals, soft landings. When she decided to attend George Washington University for law school, my parents paid $89,000 in tuition over 18 months. When she dropped out, they absorbed the loss quietly and said nothing in front of anyone. When I graduated from architecture school, I received a card and a dinner out. I'm not saying this to build a case for myself. I'm saying it because it matters to what came next. Tiffany never held a stable job after she left law school. At 28, she was living at home part of the time, drawing on accounts my parents kept open for her, drifting through up positions that never lasted longer than a few months. She was smart. She was charming when she wanted to be. She had a way of entering a room and taking the temperature immediately, knowing who to talk to, what to say. What she didn't have was a direction that was entirely her own. When I got the Pacific Heights apartment at 28, she came to see it. I remember her standing in the main room, looking at the windows, looking at the view of the bay. Her expression wasn't what I expected. It wasn't happiness for me. It wasn't even envy exactly. It was something more calculated than that. Like she was measuring something. I told myself I was reading into it. I kept telling myself that for the next 3 years. The pattern wasn't hard to see in retrospect. Every time I had something new, a client, a milestone, a relationship, Tiffany would find a way into it. In 2020, she applied to the same design firm I had just signed a contract with. She told me she hadn't known I worked with them. Her referral email used my name. In 2021, she spent 3 months orbiting a contractor I had brought in for a major project, asking questions about the industry, testing a pivot she never made. Small moves, nothing big enough to name. I never named it. 2 months before the rehearsal dinner, she asked me for access to my savings account. Her reasoning was straightforward. She was helping coordinate vendor payments for the wedding, and it would be easier if she could see the budget in real time. She had access to my phone. She knew my Face ID worked on it. She framed it as logistics. I gave her the access because she was my sister, and I was planning a wedding and I had 100 other things to think about. The last text she sent me before the rehearsal dinner was at 6:22 p.m. that Friday. Can't wait for tomorrow, so proud of you. I read it while I was getting ready. I felt warm when I read it. I would find out later that she sent that message while sitting in Brandon's car, driving up to Napa. Her bag was in his trunk. Brandon had met Tiffany for the first time at a family dinner in March of 2024, 8 months before the wedding. I had been the one to seat them near each other because I thought they'd get along. She was funny, he liked people who were quick. I watched them talk for 20 minutes about something I can't remember now, and I remember thinking, good, he's trying with my family. I attributed everything I should have examined to the explanation that made me most comfortable. He refilled her wine glass before mine at Easter. I noticed. I filed it under manners. He canceled our standing Thursday date night in September with a text. Emergency surgery, don't wait up. The next week, his colleague, Dr. Patterson, called to check in on him and mentioned offhandedly that Brandon had taken the whole previous afternoon off. I told myself Patterson had the dates confused. I did not want to see it. And Tiffany had spent her whole life understanding exactly what people didn't want to see. The venue was called Harrington Estate. No relation to Brandon, which I found out later was an irony he had privately enjoyed. Private dining room, Napa Valley. I had rented it for $18,000. Candles on every table. White roses, which I had selected individually from 3 different florists. 9 round tables, 27 guests, family from both sides, Brandon's colleagues from UCSF, 3 of my closest friends from architecture school. A string quartet in the corner that cost more than my first month of rent at 22. For the first 40 minutes that evening, I believed everything. That's the part I keep returning to. Not the betrayal itself, but the 40 minutes before. The room looked exactly like I had imagined it. Brandon was at the end of the table, talking to his department head. Tiffany was laughing at something with my cousin near the bar. My grandmother was at table 7, in the corner, back against the wall as always, watching the room with that particular stillness she carried everywhere. The centerpieces were perfect. The wine was good. I was wearing ivory silk and my grandmother's pearl earrings, and for about 40 minutes I let myself believe that this was it. That this was what you got when you worked for it long enough and carefully enough. I let myself believe it. Brandon excused himself at 8:31 p.m. He leaned down and said something about a call he needed to take. A patient's family, he said. It would be 5 minutes. I nodded. He touched my shoulder and walked out. 13 minutes later, Tiffany said she needed the restroom. I didn't connect those 2 exits. I was in the middle of a conversation with Brandon's department head about a renovation project his hospital was considering. I was half present in the conversation, half watching the room, already composing the toast I was about to give. What I didn't know, what I would only find out later from the venue's security footage, was that Tiffany's overnight bag was already in the trunk of Brandon's car. She had put it there before they drove up to Napa together. They had driven up together. The same evening she texted me, "So proud of you," she was in his passenger seat. I stood up at 8:45 p.m. to give my toast. The string quartet paused. 27 people turned toward me. I had champagne in my hand, a Rydell glass, thin-stemmed, the kind that makes the wine feel like something worth having. I started with thank yous. I said something about how the people in that room represented the life I had been building toward. At 8:47 p.m., my phone vibrated in my clutch. I felt it, but I didn't stop. I kept talking. I was 2 sentences from the end. At 8:49 p.m., I finished the toast. I raised the glass. People raised theirs. Someone said cheers, and it echoed, and then everyone drank. I set my glass down, picked up my clutch, and opened it under the table. The notification was from Wells Fargo. I read the preview. I unlocked my phone and opened the app. The full message was there. Large transfer initiated. Amount: $451,000. Account balance following transfer: $214.83. I read it once, I read it again. I put my phone face down on the table. Around me, dinner had resumed. The quartet started again. Someone laughed at the other end of the room. I smiled at the person across from me, Brandon's colleague, a woman named Dr. Walsh, and said something about how good the salmon was. I don't know why I said that. It was the first thing that came out. I excused myself 4 minutes later. I walked to the restroom. I locked the door. I stood in front of the mirror and looked at myself for 11 seconds. I counted them. Then I took out my phone and called Brandon. It went to voicemail after 1 ring. I called Tiffany. Her phone was off, not ringing, just a flat mechanical silence, and then nothing. I opened the Wells Fargo app again. The transfer had gone to an account I didn't recognize, a routing number I had never seen. I went back to the mirror. I looked at myself again for a few more seconds. Then I unlocked the door and walked back out to the dinner table and finished my meal. I don't know how to fully explain what those 20 minutes were like. I was present. I answered questions. I thanked people for coming. Some part of my brain was still performing the function of hosting a rehearsal dinner, while another part had gone completely, precisely cold. Not numb, cold. Like a temperature drop with a specific direction. When I got back to my seat, I looked toward the table 7. Sheila was watching me. She had been watching me since I sat back down, I think. Her expression was not what I expected. Not shock, not distress. It was a kind of patient attention, like someone who had been watching a storm approach from a long way off and was now simply noting that it had arrived. She stood up about 20 minutes later, walked across the room slowly, sat down in the empty chair next to me, Brandon's chair, without asking. She didn't say anything for almost 30 seconds. Then she reached into her purse and set something on the white linen tablecloth between us. A card, black, an Amex Centurion. She slid it across the cloth like she was passing a document in a meeting. She said 4 words. "Don't cry yet, Arlene." She folded her hands on the table and looked straight ahead. I looked at her. I said, "How long have you known?" She didn't answer immediately. She just said, "Longer than you." And then before I could ask anything else, she said, "Tomorrow morning, Victor will be there. Victor Caldwell, senior partner at Caldwell and Associates in Sacramento. He had been the Franklin family's attorney for 22 years. I had met him at 3 Thanksgiving dinners. I had not thought about him in years. The fact that Sheila had already called him, that she had called him before the night was over, probably before I had even found out, told me more than anything else she could have said. I looked back at the room, 27 people, still eating, still talking, still completely unaware. The string quartet was playing something I recognized, but couldn't name. The white roses on the centerpiece were still perfect. "Don't cry yet." I put the card in my clutch. I finished my water. I waited for the evening to end. We stayed in Napa that night. Sheila had a room at the same hotel where I had booked the honeymoon suite. I did not stay in the honeymoon suite. Before I went up, I asked the front desk to have the flowers removed. They had decorated it with red roses in anticipation. The staff member looked at me. I said please and thank you, and she nodded. Sheila and I sat at the window in her room until after 3 in the morning. The vineyard was dark outside. She ordered coffee. I had water. She talked, and I mostly listened. She had found out 6 weeks earlier. A woman who used to work at her company, retired now but still in Sheila's orbit, had seen Brandon and Tiffany at a restaurant in Hayes Valley, holding hands across the table. The woman had texted Sheila a photo immediately, knowing what she knew about the family. Sheila had received that text on a Tuesday afternoon in September, looked at it for what she told me was a very long time, and then made a decision. She did not call me. She did not confront them. I needed to understand the shape of it first, she said, whether it was a moment or a plan. Over the following weeks, she had been quietly watching, cross-referencing what she noticed with what she knew about Tiffany's access to my accounts, about the timeline of Brandon's behavior, about what she called the logistics of it. She was looking for whether this was reckless emotion or deliberate strategy. She found her answer. She just needed to wait for the right moment to act. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked. I said it flatly, not as an accusation, just as a question I needed answered. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Because if I told you first, you would have protected them." I didn't respond immediately. I sat with that. I knew she was right. I would have wanted to confront Tiffany directly, give her the chance to explain, give Brandon the benefit of something. I would have opened a door that should have stayed closed long enough to gather the evidence to close it permanently. "I needed you to find out the way you found out," she said, in front of everyone, with no room to minimize it. That was the part that hurt the most. Not that she hadn't told me, but that she was right not to. Victor arrived at the hotel at 9 in the morning. He was 61, precise, unhurried. He came with a folder. He sat down at the small table in Sheila's room, set his Parker pen on the legal pad, and began. At exactly 4 p.m., the hour the wedding had been scheduled to begin, we were not in a ceremony. We were sitting in a hotel room in Napa, and Victor was sliding a document across the table. The header read, "Franklin versus Harrington and Franklin, unauthorized wire transfer, and breach of fiduciary access." I picked it up, 14 pages. Victor explained the situation methodically. The transfer was to an account registered to a Nevada LLC. He had already traced the name. I didn't know the name yet. He turned to a page near the back and set his finger under a line. Harrington Franklin Ventures, LLC, registered in Las Vegas, Nevada. Date of incorporation, August 14th, 2024. I read the date again. August 14th. I went back in my memory. In early July, Brandon and I had put down the deposit on the wedding venue. In August, while I was finalizing the guest list and choosing between 2 caterers, he had incorporated a limited liability company with my sister's name in the title. He had been planning 2 futures at the same time. Only one of them had me in it. Victor continued. The LLC had 2 members, Brandon Harrington and Tiffany Franklin. $300,000 of the transferred funds had gone directly into the LLC's business account. The remaining $151,000 had gone into a Chase personal account in Tiffany's name. He had already filed for an emergency freeze order that morning at the Superior Court of California. The LLC account was the priority target. "There's a dissolution clause in the operating agreement," Victor said. He spoke carefully. "If one member exits within 90 days of formation, the remaining assets revert to the other member." I looked at him. "So if Tiffany walked away, Brandon would get all of it." "That's one reading of it." "Is there another?" Victor didn't answer that. "Wire fraud," he said instead. "Because the transfer exceeded $100,000 and crossed state lines, there's a potential federal dimension. I've asked a colleague to review. That review will take a few days." I thought about Brandon. I thought about what federal wire fraud charges would mean for a practicing neurosurgeon at UCSF. I thought about hospital privileges, medical board reviews, the particular fragility of a reputation built on precision and trust. I thought about the Patek Philippe watch he had given me on our 1-year anniversary. I was wearing it that morning. I looked at it. I kept it on. "File everything," I said. Victor picked up his pen. The freeze order was confirmed at 2:30 p.m. on Saturday, 90 minutes after the wedding was supposed to have started. $300,000 locked. Tiffany's personal $151,000 still pending, but in process. Victor read me the confirmation number over the phone. I typed it into the Notes app on my iPhone. I still have it there. at the top of a note I haven't deleted. It was the first purposeful thing I had written since the previous night. A number, a case reference, something concrete. By Monday morning, Brandon knew. His attorney called Victor's office at 8:15 a.m. Brandon had received an administrative notice from UCSF's Human Resources Department. A formal inquiry, pending an administrative review. Not termination, not yet. But his surgical schedule had been put on hold. No operating room access, while the matter was under review. I found out later how that had happened. Sheila had made 2 phone calls on Saturday afternoon, 4 minutes total, both from the hotel room's landline, not her cell phone. The people she called were 2 members of the UCSF Board of Directors. She had worked with both of them through commercial real estate projects over the past decade. She didn't threaten anything. She simply, in her words, informed them of the situation. I had asked her about that when I found out. "You could have left that alone," I said. She looked at me. "He used your money to fund a life he was planning to live without you. He was going to open a private practice. Your $451,000 was the startup capital. I hadn't known that last part yet. Dr. Patterson, the anesthesiologist who had called me to check in on Brandon in September, had called again on Monday to ask how I was doing. In the conversation, trying to be kind, he mentioned that Brandon had been talking about leaving UCSF for private practice since the summer. He seemed excited about it, Patterson said. We all thought it was a good move for him. Summer. The LLC had been registered in August. The exit plan and the startup plan were the same plan. Brandon's attorney sent a formal settlement offer on Wednesday. The letter was 3 pages. It offered full restitution of $451,000 plus $30,000 in legal expenses. In exchange, Arlene Franklin would withdraw the civil action, refrain from further contact with UCSF's administrative offices, and agree to a mutual non-disparagement clause. Victor called me and read the terms aloud. When he finished, he asked what I wanted to do. I said, no. 1 word. Victor repeated it back to confirm. I confirmed it. He asked if I wanted to make a counteroffer. I said no to that too. He was quiet for a moment. Then, your grandmother said you'd say that. I almost smiled. I didn't. On Thursday, I got a phone call from a 617 area code. Boston. I didn't recognize the number. I answered. It was Brandon's mother. She introduced herself warmly, like we had met before. We hadn't, beyond a brief video call in the spring. She said she was calling because she was a reasonable person, and she assumed I was too, and she thought, as mature women, we could find a way to handle this quietly. She used the word mistake. She used it 3 times. I thought about August 14th, 2024. I thought about 400 text messages between Brandon and my sister over 6 months. I thought about the bag Tiffany had packed and loaded into his car before arriving at a rehearsal dinner for my wedding. I said, yo, Mrs. Harrington, your son registered a business entity with my sister 1 month after I put down a deposit on our wedding venue. That is not a mistake. That is a project. She was silent. I said, I hope you have a good evening. Then I hung up. In the same conversation, she had mentioned, trying to humanize him, I think, that Brandon and Tiffany were staying with friends in Providence. It was the first piece of information I had about where they actually were. I passed it to Victor. He made a note of it. What I didn't yet know was that Sheila had already booked a flight. She flew to Providence on Sunday morning. The ticket was booked Saturday at 11 p.m., immediately after the freeze order on the LLC account was confirmed. Her departure was 6:15 a.m. She did not tell me she was going. She did not ask my permission. She found Tiffany at the hotel, the Providence Biltmore, where I later saw the receipt in the case file. She sat down across from her at a coffee shop inside the lobby. She brought the folder. Sheila told me about this conversation later, quietly, without relish. She said she didn't raise her voice. She laid out the legal situation, the civil case, the federal wire fraud review, the freeze order, the LLC investigation, the UCSF administrative leave. She walked through what the next 5 years could look like if Tiffany did not cooperate, and what they could look like if she did. She talked for about 10 minutes, then she stopped. And then she said one more thing. Grandma loves you, the law doesn't. No. Tiffany cried for the last 30 minutes of that conversation. She also told Sheila something I didn't know. Brandon had been the one to design the plan. The LLC, the dissolution clause, the timing of the transfer. Tiffany had not come up with it. Tiffany had agreed to it because Brandon had told her that this was the only way, that he wanted to be with her, but he needed the capital to leave UCSF, and this was the fastest path. She had known it was wrong. She had known from the day he first explained it. She had agreed anyway because she was afraid that if she said no, he would leave. She burned everything she had for a man who was already calculating his own exit. On Sunday morning, Brandon left the hotel without waking her up. She found out he was gone when she saw his side of the room had been cleared. His toiletries were gone, his coat, his bag. He had left a hotel key on the nightstand, nothing else. She was alone in a Providence hotel room with a frozen bank account, a pending legal case, and the information that the man she had destroyed her family for had left at 7 in the morning without saying goodbye. At 8:51 p.m. that Sunday, exactly 48 hours after the bank alert, I was sitting in my apartment in Pacific Heights when my phone lit up. A text from Tiffany. "Please call back, Grandma just..." That was it. The sentence ended there. No period, no completion, like she had run out of something in the middle of typing it. Then my phone started ringing. Her name on the screen. I watched it ring. I let it go to voicemail. She called again. I watched it again. She called 5 more times over the next 90 minutes. 7 calls total. I watched each one. On the 7th, I picked up my phone and I looked at her contact photo. A picture from last Christmas, both of us at my parents' house, both of us laughing at something I can't remember now. She looked happy in the photo. I looked happy. Neither of us had known yet what the next 12 months held. I put the phone down. I didn't call back. Instead, I called Sheila. She answered after 1 ring. I asked, "What did you do?" She said, "I told her the truth." I asked, "All of it?" She said, "All of it." I sat with that. Then I asked what I actually needed to know. Is she going to cooperate with Victor? Sheila said yes. She was going to cooperate fully, provide documentation, sign the necessary disclosures, participate in the civil proceedings. In exchange, Victor had agreed not to push for criminal charges against Tiffany specifically. The federal case, if it went forward, would focus on Brandon. Tiffany's cooperation was the trade. I said okay. I said thank you. I didn't know what else to say. Sheila was quiet for a moment, then, "She's going to reach out. When she does, you don't have to answer, but you don't have to decide right now what that means." I said I understood. I stayed up for a long time that night. Not because I was angry. The anger had converted into something else over the past 48 hours, something harder and more functional. I stayed up because I kept thinking about something I hadn't said out loud yet. I should have had a different conversation with Tiffany. The one where you name the thing you've both been pretending isn't there. The one where you say, "I see you. I know you're struggling. I know you feel like I took up all the space just by succeeding. I know you're angry, and I don't think it's entirely unfair." I had never had that conversation. I had told myself there was time. I had told myself it wasn't my job to manage her resentment. I had told myself a lot of things that let me avoid the discomfort of looking at my sister directly. I don't know if the conversation would have changed anything. Maybe nothing would have changed, but I hadn't tried. And now I couldn't. And that was a specific kind of loss that had nothing to do with $451,000. The settlement was signed on December 18, 2024. I wasn't there. Victor had asked me if I wanted to attend. I said no. I told him, "I don't need to watch him sign. I need to not need to watch him sign." He said that was the most architect thing he'd ever heard. Brandon Harrington agreed to full restitution, $451,000 returned within 90 days, plus $85,000 in legal expenses. He had resigned from UCSF in early December before the administrative review concluded, which was its own form of answer. The federal wire fraud review was still ongoing at the time of signing, contingent on Tiffany's cooperation. Tiffany agreed to a separate restitution arrangement, $151,000 returned over 24 months. No criminal charges in exchange for full cooperation and documentation. Victor sent me the confirmation by email at 11:23 a.m. The subject line read, "Settlement executed, Franklin versus Harrington." I read it at my desk. I closed my laptop. I sat in my living room for a few minutes without doing anything. I did not celebrate. There was nothing to celebrate. The money would come back. Everything else that had been in that account, the 6 years, the discipline, the particular kind of hope attached to what that money was supposed to become, that didn't come back with the wire transfer. A week before the settlement, Sheila had told me she had updated her estate documents. She said it plainly, over the phone, the way she said most things. Arlene is now the primary beneficiary of the Franklin Family Trust. She said, "This isn't a reward for what happened. This is me saying clearly who I trust." I told her she didn't have to do that. She said, "I know." Then she told me something I hadn't expected. In the amended documents, she had left Tiffany a sum of $40,000, conditional on completion of all legal obligations. I sat with that for a long time. Sheila hadn't asked my opinion, she hadn't needed to, but I found myself returning to that number over the following days, trying to understand how I felt about it. I never quite landed on an answer. 6 weeks after the rehearsal dinner, Tiffany called. I picked up. The conversation lasted 9 minutes and 14 seconds. I know because I looked at it afterward in my recent calls. I didn't record it. I didn't take notes. She said she was sorry. She said it multiple times, in different arrangements, none of which were quite sufficient and all of which I believed were genuine. She tried to explain. I let her. She talked about Brandon, about the months of being told that this was the only way, about the specific terror of believing that if she didn't agree, she would lose the only person who had ever chosen her over me. She talked about August, about the LLC, about the moment she had initiated the transfer, and what it had felt like. Not triumphant, she said. She said it felt like jumping off something, like falling the whole way down. I listened to all of it. Then she said, "I knew it was wrong every single day from August to October. I just couldn't stop." I didn't say anything for a while. Then I said, "I know." Because I did know, not in the way she meant. I hadn't known what she was planning, but I had known for years that something in her was broken, that some part of her had calcified into resentment in a way I had never directly addressed. I had known it, and I had moved past it without stopping. And that didn't make what she did acceptable. It didn't come close. But it meant that the story of what happened wasn't only about a woman who stole from her sister. It was also about a family that let a fracture widen over years, because addressing it would have required admitting it was there. At the end of the call, she asked, "Can we talk again sometime? When things are, I don't know, someday." I said, "Someday isn't an appointment." Then I said goodbye, and I ended the call. I didn't block her number. It's December now, 1 month since Napa. 1 month since the string quartet and the white roses and the champagne glass and the bank alert. I'm still in the Pacific Heights apartment. I'm not selling it. I'm not moving. People have asked me if I want to start over somewhere new, and the answer is no. I chose this apartment, I bought it myself, and I'm not leaving it because of someone else's choices. That's not how this works. The Patek Philippe is still on my wrist. It's a good watch. I know how that sounds. I don't especially care how it sounds. It keeps accurate time, it's well made, and I earned the money that bought it indirectly. It was a gift, but nothing in my life is untouched by my own work, so I wear it. That's my decision, and I'm at peace with it. Sheila calls every Sunday. We don't always talk about what happened. More often, we talk about projects. I started the largest commission of my career in December, a cultural center in Oakland. Sometimes she asks about the case. Mostly she doesn't. She never brings up Tiffany or Brandon unless I do first. A few Sundays ago, just before she said goodbye, she said something I wrote down. "The ones who leave in the dark always come back when the lights are on. Don't let that surprise you, and don't let it move you." I wrote it on a notepad on my desk. Blue ink, my handwriting. I look at it most mornings. I've thought a lot about the 11 seconds in that bathroom mirror, about the specific decision I made in that moment, not to fall apart in front of 27 people, not to chase 2 people who were already gone, not to perform a grief I wasn't ready to feel in a room full of witnesses. I made one choice that night that was entirely mine. And I made it in 11 seconds in a venue restroom in Napa, while the string quartet played something I still can't name. That was the moment. Not when the money came back. Not when Brandon signed his name. The moment was in this mirror, when I decided what kind of person I was going to be, when the worst thing that had ever happened to me was happening. I want to say I knew then that everything would work out. I didn't. I knew nothing. I just knew I wasn't going to break in public, And I knew there was a black card on a white tablecloth waiting for me at the end of the hallway, and I knew my grandmother had been sitting in that corner for a reason. Sometimes that's enough. Knowing you're not alone. Knowing someone who has survived worse is already in the room, watching, waiting for you to find your footing. There's one thing I haven't told you yet. About 3 weeks after the settlement was signed, I was working late in my studio. The back room of my apartment I converted into an office the year I went freelance. It was past 11. The Oakland project was spread across my drafting table in layers: site surveys, structural notes, a preliminary elevation I'd been revising for 4 days. The kind of work that asks for all of you and doesn't apologize for it. I had music on low. I had coffee that had gone cold an hour earlier. I was, for the first time in weeks, genuinely inside something that wasn't the previous 2 months. My phone lit up on the corner of the desk. A number I didn't recognize. New York area code. I almost didn't answer. I'd been fielding calls from people peripherally connected to the case. Brandon's former colleagues, a mutual acquaintance who'd heard something through someone and wanted to express sympathy in a way that felt more like gathering information. I had gotten good at not answering, but something made me pick it up that night. I don't know what. Maybe I was tired enough that my defenses were running slow. The voice on the other end was a woman, older, composed. She introduced herself as Diane. She said she was Brandon's former fiance, not me, before me. She said they had been engaged for 14 months, ending in the fall of 2021. She said she had seen something online. She didn't specify what, and I didn't ask. And she had done some searching, and she had found a number that she thought might reach me. She apologized for the intrusion. She said she almost hadn't called. Then she said, "I called because I wish someone had called me." I sat down. She talked for about 20 minutes. I mostly listened. She told me that during their engagement, Brandon had opened a joint investment account in both their names. Her idea initially, for the house they were planning to buy. 14 months in, 3 weeks before their wedding date, he had liquidated the account. $63,000. He had told her it was a bank error. It had taken her 4 months and a lawyer to establish that it wasn't. She never recovered the money. She had signed an NDA as part of a settlement that returned roughly half of it. And the NDA covered the details but not, she said, the general shape of what he is. She said, "I want you to know it wasn't about you. It wasn't about your sister either, probably. It's just what he does. He finds a woman who has built something, and he builds an exit ramp out of it." I didn't say anything for a moment. I was looking at the Oakland elevation on my table, the clean lines of it, the deliberate structure. Then I said, "Did you keep your apartment?" She paused. Then she said yes, she had. She was still there. I said, "Good." We talked for a few more minutes. Nothing significant, just the particular quiet that settles between two people who have survived the same specific thing without knowing each other. Before she hung up, she said she hoped the work was going well. I told her it was. I asked how hers was. She said she was a landscape architect. Had been for 12 years. She had just taken on a commission in upstate New York that she was excited about. I thought about that after we hung up. 2 architects, 2 exit ramps. Both of us still at our desks after 11 p.m., still building things, still attached to the work in a way that apparently no one had been able to permanently interrupt. I wrote her first name in the margin of my notepad. Diane. Under Sheila's sentence about the dark and the lights. I don't know why, it felt like it belonged there. I called Victor the next morning and told him about the conversation. He listened carefully and asked 2 clarifying questions: the timeline, the NDA jurisdiction. He said he'd look into it. He said if there was a pattern of behavior across multiple victims and multiple states, it changed the weight of the federal case considerably. He used the word considerably in the way that lawyers use it when they mean significantly more than that. I told him I'd send him Diane's number if she agreed to be contacted. I texted her that afternoon. She responded within an hour. 1 word, yes. I don't know where the federal case stands right now. Victor updates me when there's something to update. I've learned to let the legal process move at its own speed, which is slow and indifferent to how you feel about it. What I know is that Brandon Harrington is no longer a practicing neurosurgeon. He is not at UCSF. He is not, as far as I know, in Providence. The private practice he had been planning to fund with my savings has not materialized. That's not justice exactly. It's more like consequence. the natural result of a plan that relied entirely on no one comparing notes. Tiffany made her first restitution payment in January, on time to the dollar through Victor's office. He forwarded the confirmation to me as a matter of record. I read it, filed it, and went back to the Oakland drawings. I haven't spoken to her since the 9-minute call. I don't know if I will. That's not a decision I've made in one direction. It's more that I'm not ready to make it yet, and I've given myself permission to not be ready. There are people who would tell me that holding the door open is weakness. There are people who would tell me that closing it completely is failure. I've stopped listening to both of those people. The door is where it is. I know where the handle is. That's enough for now. What I keep thinking about, what I return to more than any of the legal details, more than the money, more than the watch I'm still wearing, is Diane's question. Not the one she asked out loud, the one underneath it, the one she was really calling to ask, which was, are you okay? Not are you winning? Not are you getting the money back? Just, are you okay? And the honest answer, the one I'm still working toward, is, I'm getting there. I'm at my desk. I'm building something I'm proud of. I call my grandmother on Sundays. I eat dinner at a table I bought for myself in an apartment I own outright. Some mornings I wake up and the first thought is the Oakland project. Some mornings the first thought is still Napa, the champagne glass, the 11 seconds. Both of those mornings are still mine. I've started to think of what happened not as something that was done to me, though it was, but as information. Information about Brandon, about Tiffany, about the ways a family can fail to name what's breaking before it breaks all the way, about what I am capable of in the worst 48 hours of my life, about who shows up and how and what it looks like when someone who loves you expresses it not with comfort, but with a black card and 4 words and a lawyer on a Saturday morning. That's not nothing. That's actually quite a lot. Sheila is 74 years old. She built what she built with no map and no one in her corner. She sat at the corner of every room for decades before anyone understood why. I think about the version of her at my age, 31, building alone, watching everything, storing everything, waiting for the moment when watching would convert into action. I think I understand her better now than I ever have. Not because of what she did for me, because of how she did it. Quietly, precisely, without needing anyone to witness it. The notepad is still on my desk. Sheila's sentence. Diane's name in the margin. The confirmation number from the freeze order at the top of the page. Some nights I look at it and think about all the women who've ever had to sit down at a desk and decide to keep building after someone took the material. All the ones who didn't have a grandmother with a black card. All the ones who had to figure it out from nothing, the way Sheila once did, the way Diane did, the way I almost had to. I think, we're all still at our desks. That's not a small thing. That's the whole thing. If you're listening to this and you recognize something, a person, a pattern, a moment where you saw the text and finished the toast anyway, then you already know what I know. You're just deciding what to do with it. Take your time, but don't take too long.